Welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon, the podcast, where we dive deep into all things health and wellness to help you find health and healing inside and out for now and forever.
Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, Finding the Root with Megan and Shannon. I am Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective, and this is my co-host and head practitioner, Shannon Callery. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
So today we have a big episode, and this is going to be, this is a kind of skim the surface a little bit. We're going to dive as deep as we can into this, but this is a massive topic. So today we're talking about toxin overload issues, and toxin overload issues is one of the biggest root causes for health issues that are out there. It's so big and so important, and I know we're only going to be able to skim the surface here, but we are going to try and give you some really good information as far as how and why toxin overload issues can happen, where does this stem from, and then what are some things that you can really do to support your body and work through some of these issues, and also how do you prevent some of these issues kind of moving forward. So we're going to try and dive into all of that today. So let's start with toxin overload issues. How does this happen? Why do people end up with this? And Shannon and I have obviously both been in this position in a variety of ways. And I'll share some things I'm currently doing here as well as, as I travel and all that kind of stuff and all that kind of stuff. But let's dive into how does this happen? What are some of the big reasons as to why toxin overload issues can happen in them?
Yeah, so realistically, I would say most of society, this is just something that we deal with given the amount of toxins that we're exposed to and the level of stress that we're exposed to. But really how it happens in the body is we have this concept called homeostasis. And what that means is when our body is in like a really balanced place, everything is working the way it should. So like we're going to the bathroom regularly. Our liver is functioning the way that it should, like clearing out toxins. We have enough stomach acid to digest our food and help protect from pathogens and whatnot, which we've talked about that in other episodes. So these are like some really basic functions that the body needs to be like, when it's in homeostasis, all of these things are working properly. And when that's all working smoothly, that's how we protect ourselves from getting this buildup of toxins, because the body is very, very smart. So like naturally, if we're exposed to something, some sort of toxin in the air, for example, if your body's in good standing, it's going to filter it out naturally. You might feel like maybe a little bit uncomfortable for a day or notice that you feel off, but ultimately your system's going to get rid of it pretty quickly. When we start to have these issues build up, like maybe some bacterial issues, some yeast issues, some parasite stuff, there can be so many different things. When it starts to build up in that sense, that's when we know that our body's no longer in homeostasis. And it doesn't have to be, our system can get thrown off in many different ways. So maybe you are dealing with like chronic stress or prolonged stress. Maybe you had some sort of like traumatic event happen, you switched jobs, anything that puts stress on our body and like fills up that stress bucket can throw our body out of homeostasis. And then toxins can build up.
Exactly. And so a really classic example that we will often see, and, I'll also share some of my backstory, but if you go in and let's say you have surgery and, general anesthesia does have heavy metals in it for reference. However, if you go in and once again, like your stomach acid levels are good, like stress going into it wasn't terrible and your body's in a good place, your body's going to be able to get that out. Same thing with, exposure to aluminum in the world, aluminum foil and things like that. Our body is so smart and capable, given the right conditions, to be able to get this stuff out of our body. The issue really comes into is when the dysfunction happens and our body can no longer keep. So if we think, just chronic stress, and we've talked about this before. I did like a whole 30-minute thing about this, called the cortisol stress bucket. But if we think, let's say we undergo a really significant period of stress. And so during that period of stress, our cortisol levels are naturally going to rise. Once again, because what that body is supposed to do. However, if we undergo prolonged stress and those cortisol levels stay high, our liver is trying during that entire time to get all of that excess cortisol out of our body. Now, cortisol starts to get high. Now, what if we also have maybe some higher estrogens going on, which is not terribly uncommon? Our body's filtering that out too. Now we're exposed to toxins on a day-to-day basis. What if we get exposed to extra aluminum or mercury, or we're drinking water that has uranium in it, or, any of these things? At some point, the body's not going to be able to keep. And this is where the dysfunction happens. And chronic stress is a huge, huge, huge factor into this. And this is why we put such an emphasis in our practice on helping the body feel safe and nervous system regulation, trauma healing work, because we know if we can keep those stress levels and the body in this homeostasis position, you can be exposed to, there's an exception here, but just about anything, and your body should be able to get it out, assuming it had all of the right conditions and in a good place to be able to handle this. The issues really come into when the body's no longer in that really good place for any number or variety of reasons, chronic stress being a huge, huge factor.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like food poisoning is a pretty decent example here too. Like when you have food poisoning, typical body response is vomiting, diarrhea, and what your body's doing is purging it out. It's purging out whatever bad bacteria or, parasite, whatever you had. That's the natural response to have it leave your system. But then when we have again, it's part of it is just life too, which, referring back to what Megan just said, that's why it's so important to try and keep our nervous system regulated, because it plays such a big role here with that buildup factor. But if you had other issues going on and then you got the food poisoning, I actually just talked to someone who dealt with this, and that's exactly what happened. She had a couple major stressors happen. She got food poisoning, and then it was like the icing on the cake for her. Everything started showing up after that. So that's kind of how the buildup in the body works and how we can start to experience some of these bigger issues.
Exactly. And I also just want to throw this out there because this was definitely the case for me. For me growing up, I remember dealing with constipation issues for a large, I don't even know when it started. I don't have memories of when it started. I remember, I was hospitalized for it at one point. And just having to take Miralax really young, enemas really young. And no one in middle school or high school wants to deal with any of that. However, and that continued on through, my 20s, up until I started doing a lot of work around holistic health and the healing. And even after my car accident is really when I started diving into. If you have chronic constipation issues, and mine was definitely a trauma risk kind of just holding, and this is really common, if you grew up in a household, it wasn't a safe place to express your emotions and feelings and really show up as yourself. This will often show up in younger people as constipation because they're holding on to everything. And that constipation really didn't really go away until I did start doing some deeper nervous system regulation work. And that's when it really went away. Very rarely do I ever deal with it now. It does every once in a while. But even very rarely. But I spent, from, let's say, middle school. So I was pretty young in middle school. I was 10 or 11 until mid 20s. That's a long time to be constipated. And that's a long time for your body to consistently be reabsorbing toxins into your body that your body's not going to be in a good place. And it's just reabsorbing these things. And then if they're recirculating, and you're probably going to end up with gut issues, these were all build up things to my accident, which once again, like my accident was just an icing on the cake to all of the gut issues I was experiencing, all of the chronic fatigue, the autoimmune stuff, the thyroid issues, all of these things. And a big part of that buildup was chronic constipation for a good portion of my life. My body just constantly reabsorbed these.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I actually, for as long as we've known each other, I did not realize that you had that bad of constipation issues. I also did too, for like same time frames. I did not know that for you. Yeah. So, and another thing to think about here, since this is something that we both experienced, and I also I know right away if I have too much stress that I'm dealing with, or, that includes travel, not sleeping well. I typically, the first thing to happen to me is not enough sleep and then getting a little bit constipated. Those are the first two things to happen. But I just want to throw out there too, that think about that time frame that Megan just said, like from when she was 10 years old until in her mid 20s, her body was not releasing toxins and everything was being reabsorbed back into her system. That is an incredibly long time to have your body exposed to toxins. And that takes a very long time to undo.
Yes, so long. And then, that is baseline. That doesn't even include, I've had a couple surgery, I had a couple surgeries. I went under general anesthesia a few times during that time. I was on allergy medication, which had aluminum in it. And just for reference, the reason I keep bringing up aluminum is aluminum toxicity is one of the biggest toxins that we see really high. If I look at some of my old tests, like my aluminum levels were crazy high. I was on birth control for almost that entire time, not quite. I went on in high school, but a really good portion of that time, just general exposure. We used, aluminum foil growing up. I had mercury fillings in my teeth. I had several of those. That's another really, really big one. So, and who knows what else I was exposed to, during my time, especially in college. I lived in some really old dorms.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought was in there?
Yeah, we are very, I feel like that, and we'll get to this at the end here when we talk about different things that we can do to help reduce our exposure. But realistically, we are exposed to a lot of things, especially in, the kitchen. When we're talking about aluminum specifically, like cooking with aluminum foil, aluminum trays, cookware has aluminum core in it, especially, the non-stick stuff is like a whole different ball game with different chemicals. It's just, and we don't mean it to sound, I realize as I'm saying that also sounds very overwhelming, which is not my intentions. It's just, it is important to become aware of the different ways that we are easily exposed to toxins.
Exactly. And once again, there's only so much you can do. And we will, once again, at the end, we will talk about ways to start reducing and how to actually do that, and it took both of us years to really, really get there. So it's not an overnight thing by any stretch of the imagination. And that's why it's so important that our defenses are in a really, really good spot, because there is only so much you can do to limit, reduce exposure. And exposure is going to happen. Even unless you grow all of your own food and, do all of you've got to be really, really into all of the holistic health style to avoid all of it. And even then, real question mark, all of it. But you can avoid a lot of it that way. But that's obviously not realistic for the vast majority of us. So that's why having our defenses up, keeping our body in a really good spot is so important when it comes to this.
Yeah. And so one other thing that we kind of wanted to jump into here is another big thing that we see is people who are dealing with chronic sickness, or maybe you get sick and you're not bouncing back from it. This is also a really good indication that, well, number one, there's probably something else going on, because naturally, again, if your system is functioning properly, it's normal to get sick, like, maybe once or twice a year, but your body can fight it off naturally. It shouldn't last like 2 weeks long. Maybe, I don't, 5 or 6 days or something is a realistic time. But if you notice that maybe you got a certain virus and things just continuously got worse from there, and you weren't able to bounce back from it, this again is another indication that, your body needs some support. There's probably some bigger imbalances going on that have to do with different things in the body.
Exactly. So I think that's a good overview, and let's talk about the exception here. So mold would at times be an exception, and we're not going to dive too deep into this. We are going to talk about it just a little bit, but we also did 3 episodes on mold.
I laugh every time.
Gotcha. The first one, we really talk about exposure and kind of how this happens before we get into the testing. So that first episode on mold, if you're interested in learning more about this, is a really good step to dive a little bit deeper into this. But for people who have a good level of exposure to mold, and I'm not talking about, we're not talking about mildew, we're talking about legitimate mold, which can be seen sometimes. It can also be very stinky and not seen at all, and is very, very good at hiding. But if you have prolonged exposure to mold, whether you are living there, whether you have lived there previously or currently live in a place, same thing with work, same thing with school, mold is very challenging for the body to get out by itself. Now, if you go to a restaurant and you have a meal for an hour or two, and there happens to be mold in the building, that is totally different. We are talking about living and or spending a significant amount of time in a place where you're being exposed to mold spores, you're breathing that in, it's recirculating in the body. Things can really start to go wrong, even if your body was originally in a pretty good state.
Yeah. So think like, at work, you're there for 7 or 8 hours a day. You're going home, and if you have mold, you're sleeping there every night, or you're there all day throughout the week on the weekend. Those are more so the situations that we see happening. It's also really common, like if you grew up in an old house, like a very old house, we see that a lot for mold exposure. But the whole point is that realistically, mold is everywhere. So like Megan was saying, if you go out to eat at a restaurant and yes, there happens to be mold there, naturally, if your whole system, specifically your liver, does a lot of this work here, if that's functioning right, it's not going to affect you, because you're going to clear it out just as you would if you ate a bad piece of food or whatnot. So, this is a question that we get a lot, well, how come I have mold toxicity and this friend who, spends a lot of time at my house? Or, realistically, I have seen people who they live in the same household and one person is completely fine and the other person has all of these things going on. It really depends, like, where is your body at? Is your liver functioning? All these things that we just talked about. And that's why it affects people so differently.
Exactly. And I will also throw this out there too, especially because we see this a lot of when there's a male and a female living together in the same place and that has mold and or working there. Women are more sensitive in nature, and that's largely because our body is always shifting and changing, because our hormones are always shifting and changing, and even like our hormones can shift and change and be different, which is obviously why blood work is not the best when it comes to hormones. But that does play a big factor. We're also just, our brains are designed to be a little bit more sensitive emotionally, which means that we can be a little bit more sensitive just in nature to chronic stress, to trauma, to things like that. And I'm not saying it's all women, I'm just saying in general, women can be a little bit more sensitive because we do often see, a male-female partnership where the man is totally fine and also sometimes not. And they just put on a brave face or pretend everything is fine. And the woman is dealing with some pretty significant. And that is not uncommon. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just our bodies are a little bit more sensitive.
Yeah, and actually a good resource for this, and I may pronounce it wrong, Gabor Monte, I can't remember how you say it. His newest book, I can't think of it right now, but we will put it in the show notes. Have you read it, Megan? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have not read the new one. It's Gabor Mate. There's a little accent on the E, but phenomenal resource. Anything nervous system, trauma related, childhood stuff, talks about addiction in one of his books. Phenomenal resource.
Yeah, well, in this most recent one, and I haven't even finished it yet, a large part of the first either two or three chapters, he's talking about how females are more sensitive, more susceptible to certain diseases and sicknesses. And there's certain studies out there that show the females who were more like, not standoffish, that's not the right word, maybe easier to like set boundaries and say no, had lower issues of like disease and sickness and whatnot. So that's a really good resource if you're interested in learning more about that. Highly recommend checking him out.
Super good. Yeah, I mean, women, if we look at, I have a lot of familiarity with the autoimmune side of things, and personally, obviously professionally too. But yeah, I mean, women are, I forget the exact number, and I want to say this is right. I might be wrong, and I apologize if this is wrong, but like 80% more likely than men to get an autoimmune disease in their lifetime. I mean, it's really, really significant. And it is the large part of it is just we're a little bit more sensitive and we've got more going on and more shifts and changes. And, our body's just doing a lot more at all times, particularly with these hormones and then, the trauma and emotional piece. And, we tend to be the caregivers, oftentimes over caregivers. People pleasing patterns tend to be popular among women. We have a hard time saying no, setting those boundaries, all that kind of all that stuff.
Yeah, that definitely plays a big role in it. And that is the importance of being able to fill your own cup and nurture yourself and learn how to say no and set these boundaries, which also ties into like the healing the trauma and the nervous system work. So again, like all of this stuff, it's a big circle here. Everything ties in together.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit more about actual exposure. Where do we get these things? How are we exposed? And then we'll kind of, as we're going through this, ways that we can start to limit or mitigate exposure as much as possible.
Yeah. So the biggest ones that stick out to me, so definitely food. And, I would say I'm hesitant to say this because I don't want it to cross a line, but I'll just say all food in general, it is something to think about here. Air quality is a really big one, especially if you live in a city. You're naturally just going to be exposed to different chemicals and other things. Water is a really common way. Water quality is very, very important. And then one of the biggest ones too is like home products. Like what are we using? What are we putting on our skin, our bodies? Or what are we bathing in? What are we cleaning with around the house? What are you cooking with in the kitchen? Those are like the main ones that stick out to me. Am I missing anything?
I think those are big ones.
Yeah.
Wait, I do want to talk about supplements as well.
Yep.
Because I do think that is really valuable. But let's break these down a little bit. So food.
Yeah.
So food is probably one of the ones that there are a lot of limitations that we have. Once again, unless you're growing all of your own food, if you can eat organic, great. However, you are still going to be exposed to things even on food that is quote unquote organic, and you're not, all the things with that. Anyways, so And it's more expensive, which is not feasible for everyone. I mean, absolutely no. If you look at the list of the Dirty Dozen, Clean 16, that's a really good starting point. If you are looking to buy organic and have limited resources, that's a really good place to start. But I feel like food is probably one of the ones where there are a lot of limitations, particularly financial limitations in what we're able to do. Grass fed, grass finished, free range, organic, all of these things do help, and recognize that it's also not perfect either.
Yeah, and one of the best things that you can do here, because it is overwhelming. I mean, you're going to hear people out there talking about like soil quality and all the things, and like soil quality it's just not what it used to be, and it's probably never going to go back to what it used to be, which is why we recommend taking certain, vitamins and minerals and whatnot. But the best thing that you can do for yourself is trying to eat less processed packaged foods and eating more whole foods. Wash them, like baking soda, vinegar, not just running hot water over them. Those are things that we actually can do, and that's fairly easy to help keep some of these toxins out of our system when it comes to food.
Exactly. So that's a good place to start. Air quality is a really big one. If you do live in a city, if you live by a golf course, by a highway, in a community that uses a lot of chemicals on, just the grass or in plants or anything, your exposure level is just generally going to be higher. And so that's why it's really important. For me, when I lived back in Virginia, I lived by a golf course and I lived by a highway. So doing, the liver supporting activities that we talk about like endlessly, go a really long way. And it was really important for me to make sure that my body stayed in a really good spot. And those go a really long way, especially knowing that I did live close to a golf course and was pretty close to a highway. And my level of exposure was just generally higher, just based on where I was living.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, that's the same for me. I've lived throughout the years and right now in multiple apartments that are right next to the highway, close by golf courses. I'm in main cities that spray lots of chemicals to prevent weeds and mosquitoes and, other bugs and all the things. And also lots and lots of high tension wires. So we won't go into this too much, but like EMF exposure, that is also something to consider, because we are very easily exposed to that with like our cell phones, our computers. That's something that most of us are on very frequently during the day. So, distance, try not to keep like your phone right in your pocket. I know a lot of people put it in like their front pocket or their butt pocket. It's best to keep it like as far off of your body as you can. But yeah, these are things that we're going to continue to use. We just want to try and set some boundaries with it.
Exactly. And once again, for me, I have a priority list, and unfortunately my phone is near me almost all of the time because a lot of my work is on my phone. Mm-hmm. And so, I'd say, for people, like, pick and choose your battles and, do what you can here. And there are a lot of things that you can do. So kind of moving down the list, air quality. This is a really, really big one, especially, if you live in an older home, if you've lived and or worked someplace that water damage, I'm going down the mold rabbit hole here for right now. Water damage, any leaks that have happened, any like, if you see anything in the ceiling or in the bathroom, just leaking or mold or mildewy, smell of that. An air filter is not perfect, and it can go a really, really long way. HEPA filters tend to be really good in general, not for mold necessarily, but just in general, they tend to be really good. Air Doctor has a really good one. We do work with Air Doctor, just because we believe the quality is really good. And then there's the one I can never remember. It's High Tech is the name of the company, but I don't remember. It's HEPA plus that other filtration system.
It might be PCO. I'm not sure if is that the one that High Tech has? Because I know that's a really great air filter for mold specifically. And there are a couple other brands that you can get the PCO and HEPA filter in like a smaller unit, because High-Tech is really like not industrial, but it's more something you would put in your house if you like own a home and you're like really trying to take your air quality seriously. That's a great filter for that. Another thing I wanted to mention too is if you notice like a lot of humidity buildup, especially in the bathroom when you're taking showers, if you see any like bubbling in the paint going on, can't think of, not floorboard, but the baseboard piece, whatever it's called, getting a dehumidifier is going to be also a really good option just to help keep some of that humidity out of the walls, hopefully helping prevent any mold growth and whatnot. But those two things, the air filter and that, both good options in general just for keeping better air quality.
Exactly. Yeah, all really good things. The other one, I always forget this one too, is the condensation. You notice condensation on the inside of like your windows and things, that's often a sign that there's mold somewhere in the house or building or anything like that. So, just all things to look out for. Air filters can go a long way, and the price range on good air filters is dramatic and can go from like pretty reasonable, like a couple hundred for a pretty good unit, to like several thousands of dollars. So this is another one of those situations of like, do what you can. Obviously, finances play a really big role here and can really add up quickly. So do what you can, and something is better than nothing always.
Yeah, and I just had this conversation with a client too. She wanted a air filter unit that was like $600 or $700 and was getting super stressed about it. And we ended up finding something that was like $100, had a really good HEPA filter in it, and it was fine. So there are other options out there. You just might have to do a little bit more research.
Exactly. And so I think that's a good lead into water as well, because this could also get crazy expensive. So water is a really big one, especially because we need water. We should be drinking a good amount of water a day. So that's a big thing of what is in our water and what is going into our bodies. And I will say certain areas do tend to be worse, particularly with certain things. We've had a lot of clients from Arizona, and Arizona, I believe it's uranium that just across the board, every like hair tissue mineral analysis that I've ever seen is just crazy, crazy high. And once again, I believe it's uranium. I'm pretty sure I'm now second guessing myself. But there is something in Arizona's water consistently across the state that it comes up really high that is considered a heavy metal and toxic. So, there's websites where you can go to like your county or find out where your water is coming from. And they are required to do testing. For most places, it's every year. There's a new report that comes out that will show you what is in your water and the quantity of that water. And it's free. So this can be a good starting point. This is not perfect because everyone's water is different. Getting your actual water tested can be really valuable. That can also get expensive. So, at least looking at, where's your water coming from? What is in that water? And then choosing a water filter, and we'll get into water filters here in just a minute, can be really helpful and valuable.
Yeah. And another resource that you can look at. So it's going to be a little bit different, kind of like in reference to the way that Western medicine looks at blood work and the way that, us as functional practitioners looks at blood work. There's going to be different ranges for these things. So everything is measured in like parts per billion when it comes to what's showing up in your water. So there's a website, it's called EWG, like /tap water or something. Again, we'll find out exactly what it is and put it in the show notes. But if you put in your zip code, it's going to pull up everything that is out of range, or like, most of the things are way over parts per billion. And this is a good idea to just, give you an idea of like, how bad is my water? I'm in Houston, which is a huge city. The water is so awful. So it's like, it really just depends on the area. I mean, if you live like way out in the country, maybe not near a lot of farmland or anything like that, your water might not be that bad. But still, just looking is a really good place to start, because we can pick up a lot of different toxins from the water that affect our body. And we're talking like, I'll start to talk about filters here, because I was going to say, like, the water that you shower in, it's not only the water that you're drinking. So, something to pay attention to. And then with the water filter thing, same thing. It can go from pretty affordable, probably like around $100 to probably over $1,000, depending on how big your filter unit is, what type is it. Do you have is it Berkey? I never had it.
Is so I did have one. Yeah. I don't have it with me. I do have a different travel filter. I have a gravity filter. Now, okay. A Pro One gravity filter that it's not perfect by any means, but I have found it to be very helpful, and it's easy to travel with.
Okay, nice. Yeah. And then this is another big thing too. It kind of depends on like where you're at in your health journey. So for me, we actually bought because the water is so awful here, we actually bought a distiller, like a countertop distiller. And if you're going to drink distilled water, you absolutely have to remineralize it, add some kind of drops to it, salt, other things. You cannot just drink plain distilled water, because it's going to pull all the minerals from your body, and that will not end well. So distilled water is an option. You just have to make sure that you're remineralizing it the proper way. That's probably the best way that I know to completely get rid of all contaminants from your water. Now, not everyone is going to put a whole house distiller in. That's not a super common thing. So I would look into some sort of like shower filter, or like under the sink, under the counter filters for the kitchen in the bathroom. One company that I really like is called HydroViv, Viv. And you actually, they create the filter that you need based off of your zip code in the area that you live in. And they have information on what are the contaminant levels around you, and they're going to custom make your filter for that. And it's not crazy expensive. It's in the $200 to $300 range for that. It depends on how many filters you buy.
Yeah, which is very reasonable. And we also understand not possible for everyone. Reverse osmosis is generally considered a pretty good option. There's a lot of a wide variety of companies and different ways that you can get reverse osmosis. And it's pretty controversial too. And I would say, just from my own research and experience, reverse osmosis or distilled are probably going to be your best options. I do, like, personal opinion, I do think distilled is the best, just because it is pulling everything out. Once again, as long as you are remineralizing it, there's so much value in that. And it's also not, once again, not possible for everyone to get that. And because there is the extra effort of having to remineralize it and all that kind of stuff. So just things to look out for. I also want to say, sometimes if you are on well water, it is more worthwhile to get your specific water tested than to go through any resources that we have mentioned thus far, because there can be a lot of variation when it comes to well water.
Oh yeah, definitely. I actually grew up, we had a well, we had well water, but we also had an RO system that we didn't know to remineralize. By the way, you also have to remineralize RO water because it is stripping out all the minerals. So I literally grew up drinking pretty decent quality water, but no minerals in it. So that was an issue. But again, with the distilled and RO thing, so one of the things that I dealt with was radium toxicity. We did have an RO system, so, it was decent water, but the area we were in, I can't pinpoint it exactly because they wanted like $3,000 to test for that specifically, which was not feasible for me. But it is one of the things that I dealt with. So yeah, there's so many different things that can come up in your water if you have the funds to test it, or if you do have your own well. I think it's a little bit more reasonable depending on, you can ask them, what will you test for? They're probably not going to test for everything, but it's a really good starting point.
Yeah. And some RO systems do have a remineralization process already installed. So just something else to look at. The other thing is something else to look at, and sometimes this is an add-on. Usually I would say this is an add-on, and that's a fluoride filter.
Mm.
Fluoride can be quite toxic, especially in our level of exposure and how much fluoride is in so many things right now. So that is something else to look at and be aware of, and just look at your exposure. For me, I switched dentists and I switched to a biological dentist, and they do not use fluoride. Fluoride filters, toothpaste, no fluoride in my toothpaste, things like that. So that's another thing just to kind of be on the lookout for when it comes to water and some other products too. And I'll also say kind of order of operations, and let me know if you have a different opinion on this, but I think drinking water is most important as far as like the quality. I would say next is, I don't now it's a toss up between a shower head and, what's coming out of your sink and you're washing your hands with, what you're washing like fruits and vegetables and other things with. Yeah, that's kind of a toss up for me, kind of which is more important after that.
Yeah, probably both are pretty in line because when you're taking a shower, you're washing your face, you're brushing your teeth over the sink, water's going in your mouth. So you just kind of have to prioritize yourself if you're trying to choose between the two to see what works best for you. And I also want to add into the fluoride thing. Were you part of the group that did fluoride treatments when you were younger?
Oh yeah.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
So
Which didn't help anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember being in school and them coming around with like little trays and us doing the fluoride treatment. So yeah, we were, well, I don't think they do that anymore. I hope they don't. But we've all done a little detoxing from fluoride at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it is really something to be on the lookout for. And for the fluoride, it's really the amount of exposure that we have now is so high, and the body just has a hard time getting. Once again, it's just the amount of load that is on your body, and the fluoride adds up pretty darn quick.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Ready to move on?
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So the next thing is going to be home products. So like cleaning products. I'm not going to say any like basic names. I'll just say basic cleaning products, or some certain ones that you might think are like green. It's called greenwashing or green labeling. Look at the ingredients. You want to know what it is. A lot of the natural ones have like enzymes in them. Vinegar is a big thing. Baking soda. I would say those are probably like some of the big things for scents, because the chemical fragrances play such a big role in this like toxin area. They really affect our hormones in our body and so many other things. So nothing that has chemical oh my God, I can't say the word right now. Perfumes. That's what I was trying to say. Perfumes, fragrances. You want to look for things that just say like essential oils in them. That's going to be, if you want something with a scent, that's going to be your best option. Same thing for like candles and whatnot. Try to avoid like paraffin wax candles. That's naturally, or normally, not naturally, what candles are made out of. Same thing with the fragrance. Like try and get candles that are made with coconut oil, beeswax, and scented with essential oils. Those things aren't going to mess with your body and add to that toxin overload like the chemical stuff is.
Yes. And even with essential oils, there is a range in the quality of them. And depending on who you talk to, some people may even disagree. A handful of people who would disagree with us right now, saying you should buy nothing with fragrance ever. I get it. I understand where they're coming from. And I also know that's not going to be feasible or realistic for everyone. I mean, me personally, I love candles so much. I love candles, and I use other things like incense and things that are natural and very clean. candles are usually beeswax. Occasionally I'll have one that's coconut oil based, but usually it's beeswax. And I mean, you don't know the quality of the essential oils, and I realize that, and I pick and choose my own oils too.
Yeah, same. I mean, I try my best. Sometimes I'll make my own candles and I'll buy the essential oils myself, but like, yeah, I'm not willing to completely give up certain scents that I like, especially when they are widely available in essential oils. Now, if I'm putting them on my body and using them for medicinal purposes, that's a different story. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting the best quality ones because that's completely different. When it's like in a candle or something, there's a little more wiggle room there.
Yeah, exactly. And for the actual products that you're putting on your body, no scent or doing something that 100% the quality of it, where it's coming from, the sourcing of it, all of that stuff is really, really, really important. And I mean, I can tell a difference. I mean, I buy all my products, almost none of my products have any sort of scent. And I mean, laundry detergent, anything like that. And I can tell a difference pretty immediately when I don't have control over certain things and there are scents, and it makes a really big difference. Even, and when you switch to this and become more sensitive, if you walk into a place and there is artificial fragrances, you're going to be able to tell immediately. And, for me, like sometimes it'll even like bother my nose a little bit where I'll just get like a little twitchy in my nose because I can smell it and it smells so artificial and chemically to me that it's really repulsive.
Yeah, that my sinuses normally will start to act up. Usually I will get some sort of like little headache when I'm around like a lot of candles or a lot of people use like the wall plugins. Yeah, instantly. And it's hard, like, when you're traveling, staying at hotels, Airbnbs, it kind of is what it is. Unless you have a portable air filter that you're going to carry around with you, you might need to just bring some extra supplements with you, some liver supporting stuff to help your body handle it when you're there.
Exactly. And, just to give you a little bit of a personal example, because I have been traveling now for several months and have not had control over everything. For me, like, because I'm traveling longer term, a portable water filter was really important. I did bring a lot of my own products that I use: shampoo, conditioner, soap, face wash, makeup, all of that, deodorant, all of that kind of stuff. And I largely do not use what is provided to me because I can tell what is a chemical and what is not. And I want to reduce my level of exposure as much as possible. For me, the cookware has been a big thing that I have not had a lot of control over. I'm very aware of it. And I'm doing it. And the same thing with the air quality. I did not travel with an air filter. The place I'm in now does have an air filter. It's very loud though. So it is largely not on. And so just being aware of those things. And so, making sure I'm staying on top of liver support, really important. I'm actually doing some detox work right now and using one of our very, very strong binders as a little bit of a sweep here. Along with, extra liver support in a supplemental form and all of the lifestyle things that I already do. I make sure I have my extra oil packs with me. I have the dry brush with me. I eat my coffee enema stuff with me. I've been able to take baths in a couple of places. So little things like that to make sure that my body's staying in a good position, and also recognizing I don't have as much control right now because I'm not in a place permanently. Just being aware of that and doing extra support where I can, when I can, it goes a really long.
Yeah, and just that I want to emphasize the letting go of control portion, because if you're going to stress about it, you're just doing more harm to your body. Things aren't going to work the way that they should. Things are going to build up more if we're feeling really stressed. So the more that you can focus on doing what you can and letting go of what you can't control when you're in that situation is only going to be more helpful for this entire process that we're talking about.
Exactly. And I mean, hopefully we all know at this point how seriously I take the nervous system regulation piece. And that's, for me, a huge, huge, huge priority. And I've never felt more regulated than I have like right now, even with all the traveling that I have done and continue to plan on doing. And that really does go a really, really long way.
Yeah, it does. One more heavy metal thing that we want to talk about, because this is something that we are also like pretty easily exposed to. So Megan had mentioned the amalgam fillings, which I don't even know if if dentists are allowed to do those anymore. There might still be a few out there that do it, but by and large, that's not something that they do anymore. But back in the day, yes. So that is something to, be aware of. Look in your mouth, see if you have those. If you do, you might want to consider getting them removed professionally by a biological dentist, because they're going to know like a very specific way to take them out, so you're not getting a ton of mercury exposure while they're taking them out. We talked about surgeries. Another very common thing among females and males is dyeing your hair. There are different heavy metals in hair dye. So if that's something that you do pretty frequently, again, not saying that you have to stop dyeing your hair, but maybe I know there's more natural options out there. Just something to think about as far as daily exposure. And then definitely medications, allergy medication. What are some other big ones?
That's a really big one, especially because it's over the counter. If you buy generic forms of allergy medication, please pause the podcast at this moment, go grab your bottle and look at the ingredient list. If you see anything with aluminum in it, I would switch it, if you have to stay on it, switch to the brand name version. And once again, just double check the ingredient list, but most of the brand name ones do not contain aluminum. The vast majority of the generic forms do contain aluminum. So really just look at your medication list, look at the ingredient list, anything over the counter or prescribed, just double check on it, because it is more common for many of us to get generic forms of medications, even when we're prescribed them. Look at the ingredient list, double check your ingredient list. With supplements, it's harder. It can be very challenging. There was the big scandal that came out several years ago about the protein powders, the vegan protein powders that contain heavy metals. Well, there's also a lot of supplements that contain a lot of heavy metals, and, looking at sourcing and doing deeper dives, look, it's a lot of work. It's also the reason why we have certain brands that we typically recommend, because they are vetted. And we also, when brands are bought by larger companies, you have to be on the lookout for changes in ingredients, particularly, and sourcing of those ingredients too, because heavy metals can play a really big role. And if you're taking, one of my clients just emailed me, she is nearly pregnant, which is amazing. And, there's a new thing that came out talking about prenatals, and certain prenatals now contain large amounts of heavy metals, which is obviously not good and very dangerous, for women, and their children that they are growing and developing. And so, this is why we're really particular with the supplements and even a lot of the personal care products. I'll mention a couple of personal care product companies that we like, that we know to be more clean. And so it's really important. It's just really important that you're aware of this. I am going to throw this out there just because I've seen this more with these types of companies. And if you're a part of one of these, that's fine. Just maybe do some extra research about the company that you're working with. But any sort of multi-level marketing company, I'm very hard. I've done too much research on too many of them on the sourcing of the ingredients, the actual ingredient list. Like, once again, not saying this is across the board, but oftentimes we will see it works with some of these companies, and particularly in the heavy metal arena.
Yeah, and makeup too, for females, another thing that you want to check, because sometimes they can sneak things in there that we don't want, like heavy metal products. Certain shots, that's probably as much that I can say. It might be worth asking for inserts and reading ingredients and seeing how frequently you're, supposed to get them and whatnot. That's another thing that they sneak a lot of stuff in there too, and that can build up in the body. And then, again, like your liver's job is to process all that out, but when it's overburdened, it doesn't do that, and we get the buildup. So just certain questions to ask.
Yeah, and there are alternatives in some cases. I'll even say, just because, I had a dog, vaccines for pets too. I said the word, but, that's for pets. Just there are some alternatives. And, once again, I'm not saying you should or should not do this, but maybe just ask some extra questions and see what's available, or just look at ingredient lists. Like, just things to ask questions about, and then make the decisions for yourself, and or your family or pet, whoever's involved in the situation here, of just what are you willing to sacrifice? What level of exposure? Where is someone at in their own health journey at the moment? What is their, are they experiencing a lot of chronic issues already? In which case, maybe we ask some more questions. Versus someone who is quite healthy, it's going to be a little bit different. Still worthwhile to ask those questions, but I just think it's worthwhile to dig a little bit deeper into a lot of things.
Yeah. And one other thing I want to mention really quick when it comes to heavy metals and supplements, or like lead specifically, is it's important, if you're doing research, there is organic lead and inorganic lead. In pretty much one is natural, one is not natural. Of course, it matters like how much of the product are you taking in exposing to your system and whatnot. But that is something that plays a role here too, because there's plenty of supplements out there that are very good quality. They have testing done. They show that they have, maybe some lead in them, but in organic forms, meaning like it's natural from soil, wherever they're sourcing the product and whatnot. So that is something to think about as well.
That's a great point to bring up. And, when it comes to is it Prop 65
for California? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you will see that oftentimes on certain supplements or any products and things like that. They do not distinguish between organic versus inorganic. And that is just something to be aware of. And once again, it's just about ask some extra questions of, hey, this is on there. Where is that coming from? Is it an organic or an inorganic source? Because that really makes a big difference inside of the body. And organic sources of certain metals are naturally occurring and totally fine in certain amounts. Once again, ask questions. And so really just ask questions, and not all heavy metals, are terrible. I still use aluminum foil every once in a while. However, it's by and large not what I'm using on a very regular basis. So it's really about picking and choosing your battles. For me, the makeup was a really big one. For me, I really like crunchy makeup. That's the one I've been using now. I switched, a few months ago to that brand, and I really like the products there. Shannon probably has more information on this. What is it?
Primally Pure.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Primally Pure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's another really good one. For skincare, I've been using Tearstem for years and years and years. I'm a huge fan of their products, especially their face washes. They also really valuable resource. If you are looking at any products of any sort, like personal care products, on Clearstem's website, they actually have you can just input, copy and paste the products or the ingredient list, and it will show you what is pore clogging, what is known to not be the best for the body. And it's a free and amazing resource, which is another reason why I love that company. I have been using them for many, many years. So that's a really good one. I also really like Public Goods. They have really good, very basic and clean products. I've used a lot of their cleaning products, and I mean, I have like their soap and shampoo and things like that, some of those things. So those are just a few, and Shan, I'm sure you have more companies, but those are just a few big ones that I often use.
Yeah, so I use a lot of those as well, especially just this year I switched to the Primally Pure products, a couple of their their cleansing oil, 100% pure for their makeup. I really like them. I also use some Crunchy products. There's a newer brand called Topes and Co. They have for like makeup and skincare, they have some great products. I do want to say you're going to find varying opinions on what's good and not good for the skin. So like I use a lot of like beef tallow. There's a company called Fancy Farm. It's a very like small company skincare product. It works for my face. I was dealing with acne, but if you were to put something like that in on Clear Stem's ingredient thing, they would flag that and they would say it's pore clogging, which it might be for some people, especially if you're dealing with like extreme acne or something. So again, you have to do your research, your skin best, read about products, read reviews, but there's plenty of different like great options out there for the skin. It's just going to take a little bit of research.
Yeah, exactly. Other things to think about, toothpaste, mouthwash. I was just thinking of something else too. Now I can't remember.
Deodorant?
Yeah, deodorant. Yeah, duh. That was the other really big one. Looking for deodorant, especially aluminum-free deodorant, is really important, let alone like sulfate, paraben-free, some of these other things. And, for me, with the deodorant piece, I do have more sensitive skin just kind of in general. I have pretty fair skin, pretty light complexion, which can lead to more sensitivity in general. I rotate my deodorants, and that's the only way I found to be really good. And I have, I don't know, a list of like 4 or 5 that I'll often rotate through. That as long as I'm rotating them every few months, then my skin seems to be totally fine. I'll notice if I use it for just a little too long, I'll start to get rashes under my arms. And that's a signal for me that, hey, it's time to switch. I do use ones that have like baking soda or baking soda free. Some people are a little bit more sensitive to the ones with baking soda, so that's something to think about. As far as, if you are a big sweater, it can be challenging. I will say the more you detox, the less your sweat will smell at the very least. So that is something to really think about.
Yeah, in the beginning, it might smell more especially if you switch to a natural deodorant or if you're doing other detox work in general. It's not uncommon to have smellier sweat probably for a couple months. You could do armpit detox masks with like bentonite clay, castor oil, look up a recipe online. There's tons of different ones, but that's something that a lot of people do to help, it kind of speeds up the process, helps pull some toxins out. If you're dealing with like any discoloration or anything, it can help with that too. But just some different ways to help get toxins out of the body and the cleaner products. You mentioned toothpaste and mouthwash. Uncle Harry's is a very, very affordable brand that I like. They make great toothpaste, great mouthwash. Now, it's going to be different than your normal toothpaste. It's in like a jar. It's kind of like clay. So it's definitely going to be a change up. But yeah, that's one of my favorite brands for toothpaste and dental hygiene.
Yeah. Yeah, so just these are all the things to think about. And when you're transitioning here, it can be very overwhelming, the list. Reach up to my desk here. And once again, Shannon and I spent a lot of time making the transition here. And the way we'll often recommend for clients is when you run out of something, when you go to buy another version of it, whether it's cleaning product, personal care products, whatever it is, buy a cleaner version of it. The next time you need to run out of deodorant, try and see if you can get a cleaner version. Toothpaste, makeup, shampoo, all of these things. And that's a really good way to slowly and effectively start to really transition all of these products, especially, cleaning products. It's very overwhelming here, but if you do these kind of one at a time as you're getting ready to run out and buy something new, just switching to that cleaner version can be a very simple way to start to make this trend.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this has taken me like years to swap out all of these products. I started with one thing. I think it was my makeup first, and then at the time I was using lotions. So it's just don't I know it's like a lot. You're like, "Oh my God, I'm surrounded by all these toxins. I need to do this," but just take it really slow because that's going to make the whole process better. And there's things that we didn't even get into. Like right now, at this point in my life, we're now working on like swapping out our towels for like organic cotton ones and our bed sheets and whatnot. But this has taken us so many years to get to this point. So just go slow with it.
Yeah, exactly. And same thing with cookware. Cookware is a really big one, especially if you cook a lot of your meals. Cast iron, depending on where you are with your iron status, can be good and is clean, but just the iron level, it would kind of be the concern. Ceramic, stainless steel, often, once again, we'll kind of recommend, what do you cook with most? Can we swap that out for a cleaner version? And then over time, just, reviewing, and when you're going to buy something new, making that cleaner swap, really, really valuable. I mean, mattresses, couches, all of these things. You can go down some really deep rabbit holes when it comes to quote unquote clean products and level of exposure to toxins. So take it slow, try not to get overwhelmed. The more stress you get, the more dysfunction that happens in the body. So try not to stress and do what you can. And that's really the name of the game. Do what you can with the resources that you've available.
Yeah. And that kind of, we just spent some time talking about different ways to address these things. When we're talking about the physical body and not just like removing toxins from your environment, some things that you can do are going to be liver support, which I know you love that. You've heard us say that so many times. So things like castor oil packs, Epsom salt baths, if you have access to a sauna, a dry brush, any extra things that we can do to help support our liver, to help release this stuff from the body is going to be extremely beneficial. Nervous system regulation. So, we've said this time and time again, starting really slow, like 2 to 5 minutes, maybe doing some breath work, some slow stretching with your breath work. Some people like meditations. There's tons of different options. Journaling is a big one too. Anything that can help keep your nervous system regulated, your stress response down, is going to help within this entire process as well.
Exactly. And really, those two things are great places to start. Liver supporting activities, certainly there are tons of supplements that you can take. And we do use supplements in our just very targeted supplements, good quality ones that do not have inorganic metals in them. And, helping the body, reducing stress as much as possible, which is what nervous system regulation is can we go back into a parasympathetic relaxed state as much as possible? And not saying that you need to be there 100% of the time, because that's not feasible. You're gonna get, we're gonna have stress in our body, but it's about being able to come back to that more regulated homeostasis kind of state. And that's what's really important. Yes, you can do, dandelion, root, milk thistle are some really basic ones. We don't use those in our practice, but those are some more easily available ones. If you are looking for liver support, you can certainly check out our liver detox pathway support podcast episode on that, where we do deeper dives into that. Binders can be helpful. I do want to touch on some of the binders piece too, just really quickly here. Yeah. So pick out our mold episode, because mold is totally different here. However, for talking heavy metals and environmental toxins, common ones, binders to start with, activated charcoal, bentonite are two of the most common ones. These are fine, and recognize they are not super strong when it comes to either one of these. Yes, they do have value. They have a time and a place. Chlorella is more oftenly used for heavy metals. I don't think it's having done a lot of heavy metal work on myself. I don't think it's strong enough for most people who have significant heavy metal issues. And I was definitely there. If we look at like cilantro is sometimes used for heavy metals, zeolite can be used for a variety of things as well. These individually, it can take a lot of time and a lot of effort to get this stuff out of your body. And which is one of the reasons why we use a company called Cellcore for their products, largely for killing in the gut and their binders. And their binders are unlike anything else we've ever seen on the market as far as strength and being able to both low dose and high dose a lot of their products. And their binders in particular are non-selective binders, or they are selective binders, meaning they only bind up certain things. And we have like whole charts. And I know this is not publicly available. However, they have a beautiful, beautiful chart. And I think we've linked it somewhere else. Probably not Liver Detox Pathway episode of different things that their different binders do. And there's, right now I'm doing carboxy, which is arguably their strongest binder that's on the market, good for mycotoxins, a lot of environmental toxins. I've done it once before. My hair, skin, and nails were never better than they were while on it. It makes a really big difference. And that's what I'm using now as just kind of a catch-all for anything that I have been exposed to thus far in my journey. And yeah, I mean, there's a big reason why we use their products. And so it's not readily available. If you are looking to have access, we would like to talk with you first. So you can schedule a free consult. We can get you access to their products without actually having to work with us. However, we do require a free consult before we give out information to be able to access any of their products.
Yeah. And I will say, I think I don't know how it works, but I think that you can have access to some of their products online. If you are listening to this and for some reason you're like, I want to try carboxy, please do not start with that binder. I beg you, because most people cannot handle it. We never start anyone with that binder. We always start with their lowest binder, biotoxin binder. Just do not to jump right into carboxy. If for some reason you get your hands on it, don't start there.
Same thing with HMET. Please do not, and that is their heavy metal binder. Please do not start there. Recognize that I've gone through every single one of their binders a couple times outside of carboxy, which I've done one bottle of before. I also, I was using a binder before I switched to carboxy. I do a coffee enema every single week, so oil pack a couple times a week, baths. Like, my body is already in a very good place, which is why I can jump right into it right now. And I recognize I did not also just jump right into it. There was preparation going into this, and I still had a reaction when I started it for reference. And we start, that one in particular, I mean, a sprinkle is the starting dose. So just things to think about, please. You can get really sick doing this work by yourself as well. Just please recognize that. And so there is a lot of value, for me and Shanna. We've worked with so many other practitioners in our own healing journey. And obviously not everyone was amazing, which is why we do what we do. However, please, if it is possible for you to work with someone, there is a lot of value in working with someone, especially with a lot of the detox work, heavy metal, mold, whatever it may be, because it can go really wrong.
Yeah. Lots of supervision, hand-holding needs to happen along the way with these products. And there certainly are more gentle products like Megan talked about for, the liver, like the dandelion and the milk thistle, the bentonite clay, I'm blanking on the other binder, charcoal. You can certainly start with those things. Again, if you want to do it on your own, still start very slow and low. But those products are definitely not going to be as intense as some of the Cellcore products we're talking about.
Exactly. And this is a long episode right now. So I just want to really just super, super quickly touch on testing. No test is perfect. Even functional medicine testing, HTMA is the one often used for heavy metals, and you have to be excreting them proactively for them to show up, which it really goes for anything out of your body, any sort of toxin overload. Mold, we like to use the organic acids test. There's also a total tox test from Vibrant Wellness, which is really good for environmental toxins. There's some heavy metals and some other markers on there as well, but also recognize that you have to actively be excreting these things for them to show up, and provoking can get very dangerous if you're doing that on your own. Also, it is not recommended in certain circumstances. So if you are looking into testing, yes, we do have certain tests available. We have all of these tests available. Some are available directly through our lab store through Rupa, which we'll link. Some are available. You have to go directly through us. Anything from Vibrant, you have to go directly through us, but we can't order it for you. But also the interpretation piece and preparation going into any of these tests for toxins in general is more complicated than you probably think. And there are more ways to interpret tests than you also might think. So all of that's really important information. I'll say, just with any client I've ever worked with who has worked with other practitioners, the way we analyze an organic acids test is completely different than over 90% of other practitioners out there. I'd say blood work is in a similar nature, but that test in particular, we do get a lot of feedback that they've never gotten anything close to the depth that we really look at this. So we take this stuff really, really seriously. We have a lot of experience. We know, we've been through it. We've got a lot of personal experience, obviously professional. We have, many, many years here working with hundreds and hundreds of clients at this point of going through this work. So if you need help, reach out. Once again, we do offer free consults. Anything else you want to add as we wrap up?
Okay. No, that was a long one. We covered it.
Yeah. So this was super long. So thank you for hanging in. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe if it resonates. Any 5-star reviews really, really mean a lot to us. And thank you for joining. And we hope to see you next time.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.